The morning light crept through the blinds of the small two-story house in suburban Ohio, painting stripes across the kitchen table where Tom Walker sat, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The house was alive with the sounds of a new day, his grandson's cartoons blaring from the living room, the hum of the dishwasher, and the sharp clatter of plates as his daughter, Emily, moved briskly around the kitchen. Tom watched her, remembering the little girl who used to beg him for piggyback rides, now grown into a woman with a permanent crease of worry between her brows. She barely looked at him as she set a plate of toast in front of him, her movements efficient, almost impatient. Then, without warning, she turned, her voice slicing through the morning calm. "Dad, I can't keep feeding another mouth. You need to start pulling your weight." The words landed like a punch, sharp and final, and for a moment Tom felt the air leave his lungs. He looked up at her, searching her face for a trace of the warmth he remembered, but found only exhaustion and resolve. Emily slid a job application across the table, her eyes daring him to protest. "There's a night janitor job at the hardware store. It's not much, but it's something. You can't just sit here all day." Tom's pride stung, but he forced a smile, hiding the hurt that threatened to spill over. He picked up the pen, his fingers trembling only slightly, and began to fill out the form. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. As he wrote his name, Tom's mind drifted to the sacrifices he'd made for his family. The years of overtime, the dreams deferred, the quiet moments of joy and heartbreak. He remembered the promise he'd made to himself after his wife passed. He would never let anyone treat him as a burden, not even his own daughter. The kitchen felt cold. There now the distance between him and Emily, a chasm that words could not bridge. But as he handed back the completed form, Tom's eyes sparkled with a quiet determination. He would take the job, not out of defeat, but as the first move in a game Emily didn't even know she was playing. He would show her, and everyone else, that he was not finished yet. As Emily left the room, satisfied and already moving on to the next task, Tom sat back in his chair, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The world might see him as an old man, a burden, but he knew better. He had faced harder days and darker nights, and he had always found a way through. This time would be no different. As the house settled into its morning rhythm, Tom finished his coffee, the bitterness on his tongue a reminder of the challenge ahead. He was ready. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, Tom made a silent vow. He would reclaim his dignity, not with anger or confrontation, but with patience, intelligence, and a quiet strength that no one, not even his own daughter, could ever take away. The first night on the job, Tom pulled his old windbreaker tight against the chill as he walked the cracked asphalt lot behind Miller's Hardware, the neon sign buzzing overhead and casting a tired glow on the empty parking spaces. Inside, the store was a maze of aisles, stacked high with lumber, paint cans, and tools. The air thick with the scent of sawdust and motor oil. The manager, a young guy named Kyle with a scruffy beard and a distracted air, barely looked up from his phone as he handed Tom a ring of keys and a checklist. "Just sweep the floors, take out the trash, and make sure the back doors are locked. If you see anything weird, call me. Otherwise, you're on your own." Tom nodded, accepting the instructions with a quiet dignity. and set off into the dimly lit aisles, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The hours stretched long and silent, broken only by the distant rumble of a delivery truck or the clatter of a loose shelf bracket. At first, the solitude felt heavy, a reminder of the life he'd left behind, but soon Tom found comfort in the routine. He moved with purpose, his senses sharp, noticing things others missed. The way the back door never quite latched, the flicker of a security camera, the pattern of deliveries that didn't match the logbook. He kept a small notebook in his pocket, jotting down details, his mind working quietly as he pieced together the rhythms of the place. The other employees, mostly college kids and part-timers, barely acknowledged him. But Tom didn't mind. He was used to being overlooked, and he knew that sometimes invisibility was its own kind of power. As the nights passed, he began to see the hardware store not as a dead end, but as a puzzle, one he was determined to solve. At home, Emily barely asked about his work, her relief at his absence almost palpable. But Tom didn't let it bother him. Instead, he poured his energy to his job, finding pride in the small victories, a spill cleaned before anyone noticed, a shipment logged correctly, a problem quietly fixed. The loneliness was real, but so was the sense of purpose. In the quiet hours before dawn, Tom would pause by the loading dock, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, and remind himself that every ending was just the start of something new. He thought of his late wife, of the life they'd built together, and felt her presence in the steady beat of his heart. He was not finished yet, and as the first light of morning crept through the store windows, Tom knew that his story was only just beginning. What he didn't know was that his quiet vigilance was about to uncover secrets that would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone around him. It was just after 2 a.m. on a Wednesday when Tom's routine was interrupted by a flicker of movement near the back loading dock, a shadow slipping past the edge of the security lights. He paused, broom in hand, and listened to the subtle shift in the air, the faint creak of a door, the low murmur of voices where there should have been only silence. Most people would have shrugged it off, but Tom's years of experience, both as a father and a man who'd worked his way through every kind of job, told him better. He moved quietly, keeping to the shadows, his footsteps muffled by the rubber soles of his old sneakers. As he drew closer, he saw two men, one in a miller's hardware jacket, the other a stranger, hunched over a stack of boxes, their faces tense and hurried. They were moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with honest work, their hands busy with tools and whispered instructions. Tom's heart pounded, but he kept his breathing steady, watching as they pried open a crate and began unloading power tools into a battered pickup parked just outside the bay door. He recognized the employee, Eddie, a part-timer who always seemed to have a new excuse for being late, and made a mental note of the truck's license plate, the time, the sequence of events. He slipped back into the darkness, careful not to draw attention, and returned to his post, where he jotted down every detail in his notebook. The next morning, he reported what he'd seen to Kyle, the manager, but Kyle barely looked up from his phone. "Probably just a late delivery, Tom. Don't worry about it. Stick to your rounds." The dismissal stung, but Tom didn't argue. Instead, he began to pay even closer attention, tracking the comings and goings, the shipments that didn't match the logs, the faces that appeared when they shouldn't. He started taking photos with his old flip phone, recording license plates and noting the times of every suspicious activity. The more he watched, the more patterns he saw. A network of theft and deception operating right under everyone's noses. Tom realized he was in over his head, but he refused to back down. He had been underestimated his whole life, and he knew that sometimes the quietest man in the room was the one who saw the most. At home, Emily remained distant, her questions perfunctory, her gratitude non-existent. But Tom no longer needed her approval. He had found a new sense of purpose, a challenge that reignited the fire in his belly. Each night, as he walked the silent aisles, he felt more alive than he had in years, his mind sharp, his instincts honed. He was no longer just a burden or an afterthought. He was a man on a mission, and he would see it through, no matter the risk. As the days passed, Tom's notebook filled with evidence, and his resolve only grew stronger. He knew he was getting close to the truth, and he was ready for whatever came next. The hardware store was full of secrets, but Tom was determined to bring them into the light. The more Tom uncovered at the hardware store, the more he realized how alone he truly was in his pursuit of the truth. Each night he returned home exhausted, his mind buzzing with details and suspicions, only to find the same cold distance waiting for him in Emily's house. One evening, as he quietly entered the hallway, he heard her voice drifting from the living room, sharp and dismissive. "He's just dead weight, Mom. I only got him that job so he'd stop mooching. I can't keep carrying him forever." The words hit Tom like a punch to the gut, stopping him in his tracks. He pressed his back against the wall, listening as Emily continued, her tone laced with frustration. "He's not the man he used to be. I just need him to get out of the house, maybe find his own place. I can't keep feeding another mouth." Tom's heart ached, but he forced himself to remain silent, unwilling to let her see the pain she'd caused. He slipped away to his small room, closing the door softly behind him, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded photograph of his late wife on the nightstand. He remembered the promises they'd made to each other, to always protect their family, to never let pride or hardship come between them. Now, those promises felt like distant echoes, drowned out by the harsh reality of his daughter's resentment. But even as the hurt threatened to overwhelm him, Tom found a new clarity. He realized that he could no longer rely on family for support or respect. If he wanted dignity, he would have to claim it for himself. The next day at work, Tom threw himself into his investigation with renewed determination. He watched the store with a hunter's patience, noting every irregularity, every face that didn't belong. He began to suspect that Kyle, the manager, was not just negligent but complicit, turning a blind eye to the thefts in exchange for a cut. Tom kept his ear down, playing the part of the invisible old man, all the while gathering evidence and building his case. The loneliness was sharp, but it was also liberating. He no longer cared about Emily's approval or the sideways glances from his co-workers. He had a mission, and it gave him purpose. At night, he wrote detailed reports, backing up his photos and notes, careful to keep everything hidden. The risk was real. If the wrong person discovered what he was doing, he could lose his job or worse. But Tom was no stranger to risk. He had survived layoffs, heartbreak, and the slow grinding loss of his old life. He would survive this too. As the days passed, the tension at home grew thicker. Emily's patience wearing thin, her words growing sharper. But Tom met her coldness with a quiet strength, refusing to be provoked. He knew that the time would come when he would have to confront her, to reveal everything he had endured. But for now, he kept his head down, his eyes open, and his resolve unbreakable. The world might see him as a burden, but Tom knew better. He was a survivor, and he was about to prove it to everyone, especially to himself. The hardware store was eerily quiet that night. The usual hum of the HVAC and the distant clatter of a loose shelf bracket replaced by a tense stillness that set Tom's nerves on edge. He moved through the aisles with practiced care, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, every sense alert. He had been watching, waiting, and tonight he felt the pieces finally falling into place. Near the loading dock, he spotted the same battered pickup he'd seen before, its engine idling, headlights off. Tom ducked behind a stack of mulch bags, heart pounding, and watched as the familiar group of men emerged from the shadows, their movements quick and furtive. This time he was ready. He snapped photos with his phone, zooming in on faces, license plates, and the boxes being loaded. Boxes marked with Miller's hardware logos, but filled with high-end power tools and electronics, not the inventory listed in the logs. He recorded snippets of their conversation, catching words like shipment, cut, and midnight run. The evidence was undeniable. Tom's hands trembled, not with fear but with the adrenaline of finally having proof. He knew he couldn't trust Kyle, so he slipped away to the break room, careful not to be seen, and backed up the files to a hidden USB drive. He wrote a detailed report, attaching every photo and recording, and sealed it in an envelope addressed to the store's owner, whose name he'd found on an old payroll stub. As he left the office, he caught sight of his own reflection in the glass. An old man, yes, but one with fire in his eyes. The next morning, Tom mailed the envelope from a post office across town, using a fake return address for safety. He felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety, knowing that the truth was finally out, but that the danger was far from over. At home, Emily barely looked up from her phone as he entered, her indifference a cold command. Tom kept his secret, waiting for the storm he knew was coming. Days passed in uneasy silence, the tension at work growing thicker as rumors of an investigation began to swirl. Kyle grew jumpy, snapping at the staff and double-checking logs, but Tom played his part perfectly, never letting on that he was the one who had set the wheels in motion. Then one night, as he made his rounds, he noticed two men watching him from the shadows, their eyes hard and suspicious. Tom's heart raced, but he kept moving, refusing to show fear. He knew he was being watched. But he also knew he had done the right thing. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. As he finished his shift and stepped into the cool dawn air, Tom felt a sense of pride he hadn't known in years. He had uncovered the truth, not with force or anger, but with patience, intelligence, and quiet courage. The next chapter was about to begin, and Tom was ready for whatever came next. The tension in Miller's hardware was electric as Tom began his shift, the air thick with the sense that something big was about to break. He could feel eyes on him, the weight of suspicion pressing down with every step. But he moved with the same quiet purpose as always, careful not to betray the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. Earlier that day, he'd received a call from a detective with the city police. his voice low and urgent. "We got your package, Mr. Walker. We're moving tonight. Stay out of the way and keep your head down." Tom had agreed, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. Now, as midnight approached, he made his rounds with deliberate slowness, pausing at every corner, every shadow, his senses heightened. The battered pickup was back, idling near the loading dock, and the same group of men moved with hurried efficiency, loading boxes into the back. Tom watched from behind a stack of fertilizer bags, his phone ready, recording every move. Suddenly, headlights swept across the lot as two unmarked police cars rolled in, their doors flying open as officers poured out, weapons drawn. "Police, nobody move!" The warehouse erupted in chaos, men shouting, boxes crashing to the floor, Kyle trying to slip away through a side door only to be tackled by an officer. Tom stayed hidden, his heart racing, until a detective waved him over. "You did good, Mr. Walker. We've been after this ring for months." The thieves were handcuffed and led away, their faces twisted in shock and anger. Kyle, pale and shaking, was read his rights as the store owner arrived, summoned by the commotion. The owner, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, demanded answers, and the detective handed her Tom's envelope. She read it in silence, then turned to Tom, her expression softening. "You saved this store a fortune and a scandal. Thank you." For the effort, time, Tom's name was spoken with respect, not pity. As dawn broke, the hardware store was a scene of aftermath. Police tape, flashing lights, and the stunned faces of employees who had never suspected the truth. Tom stood quietly to the side, exhaustion and pride warring within him. He had set the trap, and justice had been served. At home, Emily was waiting, her face drawn and anxious. "There was something on the news about your store," she said, her voice uncertain. Tom simply nodded, a small, knowing smile on his lips. He had done what needed to be done, not for recognition, but for his own dignity. The world had changed overnight, and so had he. The old man everyone had overlooked had become the hero no one expected. And as he finally allowed himself to rest, Tom knew that the story was far from over. The next day would bring consequences, questions, and perhaps at last the respect he had always deserved. The morning after the sting, Tom arrived at Miller's Hardware to find the store buzzing with a different kind of energy. News vans were parked out front, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, and a small crowd of employees and curious neighbors had gathered near the entrance. Tom tried to slip in quietly, but the store owner, Mrs. Franklin, spotted him immediately and waved him over with a firm, appreciative smile. "Tom, come with me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. She led him to the break room where a group of managers and police officers were waiting. The detective who'd called him the night before shook his hand, his grip strong and sincere. "You did more than your job, Mr. Walker. You helped us break up a theft ring that's been hitting stores all over the county." Mrs. Franklin stepped forward, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Tom, I can't thank you enough. You saved this business, and you did it with integrity and courage. We're all in your debt." She handed him a crisp envelope. Inside was a bonus check, more than Tom had seen in years, and a letter offering him a permanent position as head of security, with better pay and benefits. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in a long while, Tom felt the warmth of genuine respect. Word of his actions spread quickly. Local news ran a segment on the hero janitor, and neighbors who had barely nodded at him before now stopped to shake his hand and thank him for protecting their community. Even the younger employees at Miller's, who had once ignored him, now looked at him with newfound admiration, asking for advice and listening to his stories. At home, Emily watched the news report in stunned silence, her eyes flicking from the TV to her father as if seeing him for the first time. Tom accepted the praise with humility, never boasting, always redirecting a credit to the team and the police. But inside he felt a quiet pride, a sense that he had finally reclaimed the dignity that had been slipping away since his wife's passing. He was no longer just another mouth to feed or a burden to be managed. He was Tom Walker, the man who had saved the store and outsmarted a ring of thieves. As he sat on the porch that evening, the sun setting over the quiet street, Tom allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He had proven his worth not with anger or confrontation, but with patience, intelligence, and a steady hand. And as the neighborhood lights flickered on, Tom knew that his story was far from over. The next challenge would come soon enough, but for now he was content to bask in the respect he had earned, knowing that he had changed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. The following Sunday, the Walker family gathered for dinner, the air thick with the aroma of roast chicken and the low hum of conversation. Emily had invited her brother and his family, eager to show off her father's newfound success, as if it were her own doing. Tom sat quietly at the end of the table, listening as Emily recounted the story for the third time, her voice bright and a little too loud. "I told Dad he needed to get out there and do something, and look what happened. Sometimes a little tough love is what it takes." Her brother Mark nodded, raising his glass. "Well, whatever it was, Dad, you really pulled through. We're proud of you." Tom smiled politely, but inside a storm was brewing. He had listened to Emily's version of events long enough. As the plates were cleared and the family settled into the living room, Tom stood, his voice calm but commanding. "I'd like to say something." The room quieted, all eyes on him. He looked at Emily, then at the rest of his family, his gaze steady. "I appreciate the support, but let's be clear about something. I didn't do this because I was pushed. I did it because I had to. Because I was tired of being treated like a burden in my own family." Emily's face flushed, her smile faltering. "Dad, I was just trying to help." Tom held up a hand, gentle but firm. "No, Emily. You were trying to get rid of a problem. I heard what you said to Mum on the phone. I know how you felt about me being here." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Mark looked away, uncomfortable, while Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't realize." Tom's voice softened, but his resolve was unshakable. "I know you didn't, but I want you all to understand something. I'm not here because I need saving. I'm here because I still have something to give. I proved that to myself and to everyone else when I helped stop those thieves. I did it for me, not for anyone else." The family sat in stunned silence, the truth finally out in the open. Emily wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am." Tom nodded, accepting her apology, but making it clear that things would be different from now on. "I forgive you, Emily, but I won't let myself be treated like a burden again. I hope you can respect that." The tension in the room eased, replaced by a new sense of understanding. For the first time in a long while, Tom felt truly seen, not as a problem to be solved, but as a man with dignity and worth. As the evening wore on, laughter returned to the house, lighter and more genuine than before. Tom sat back, content, knowing that he had finally reclaimed his place in the family, not through anger, but through quiet strength and unwavering self-respect. The days after the family dinner felt different, as if a heavy curtain had finally been lifted from the Walker household. Emily moved through the house with a new gentleness, her words softer, her glances toward Tom filled with a mixture of regret and admiration. She started asking about his day, listening to his stories, and even inviting him to join her and her son for walks in the park. Tom noticed the change, but he didn't rush to fill the silence with forgiveness. He let the new rhythm settle, allowing Emily and the rest of the family to come to terms with the truth he had spoken. Mark called more often, checking in on his dad and asking for advice on everything from fixing a leaky faucet to handling a tough situation at work. Even the grandkids seemed to sense the shift, running to Tom for hugs and stories, their laughter echoing through the house in a way that made it feel like home again. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Emily sat beside Tom, her hands folded in her lap. "Dad, I want to say thank you, not just for what you did at the store, but for showing me what real strength looks like. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was stressed and I took it out on you. I hope you can forgive me." Tom looked at his daughter, seeing not just the woman she had become, but the little girl he'd once carried on his shoulders. "I forgive you, Emily. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." The words hung in the air, a promise and a challenge. From that day forward, the family dynamic shifted. Tom's quiet strength became the center of their lives, a steady presence that everyone leaned on. Emily encouraged him to pursue his own interests, and Tom, emboldened by his recent success, began volunteering at the local community center, helping other seniors find purpose and dignity. He started a handyman service using his bonus from the store to buy tools and a used pickup, hiring other retirees who had been cast aside by their families. The business grew quickly, word spreading through the neighborhood about the old guys who could fix anything. Tom's story inspired others, and soon he was featured in the local paper, his photo on the front page with the headline, "From Burden to Hero, How One Man Changed His Life and His Family's." The pride in Emily's eyes was unmistakable, and for the first time in years, Tom felt truly at home, not just in the house, but in his own skin. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was his to shape. And as he watched his family gather around the dinner table, laughter and warmth filling the room, Tom knew that he had finally found his place, not as a burden, but as the heart of the family. The months that followed were some of the most fulfilling of Tom's life. His handyman business, Walker Friends, became a fixture in the community, not just for the quality of the work, but for the spirit behind it. Tom and his crew, retired teachers, veterans, and widowers, fixed leaky roofs, built wheelchair ramps, and repaired broken fences for families who couldn't afford to hire anyone else. The local news did a follow-up story, and soon Tom was fielding calls from neighboring towns, his phone ringing with requests and thank yous. But it wasn't the recognition or the steady stream of work that meant the most to him. It was the sense of purpose, the camaraderie, and the respect he saw in the eyes of his friends and neighbors. At home, the change was just as profound. Emily, once so quick to judge, now looked to her father for advice and support, her gratitude genuine and her affection open. She encouraged her son to help out with the business, and Tom took pride in teaching his grandson how to swing a hammer and measure twice, cut once. Family dinners became a tradition again, laughter and stories filling the house with warmth. One evening, as the sun set over the quiet Ohio street, Tom sat on the porch with Emily, watching the neighborhood kids play tag in the yard. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed me what real strength looks like. I hope I can be half as resilient as you." Tom smiled, his heart full. "You're stronger than you think, Em. We all are, when we have to be." The words hung in the air, a quiet benediction. As the stars blinked to life overhead, Tom reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From feeling like a burden to becoming the backbone of his family and his community. He knew there would always be challenges, moments of doubt and hardship, but he also knew that dignity and respect weren't given, they were earned day by day through patience, kindness, and the courage to keep going. The final scene was simple but powerful. Tom, surrounded by friends and family, his head held high, laughter echoing into the night. He had reclaimed his place in the world, not through anger or confrontation, but through silent, strategic, and intellectual payback. And as the porch light glowed softly behind him, Tom Walker knew that his story was far from over. It was just the beginning of a legacy built on quiet strength, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds of family.